Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of Corporate Services Committee to order. Sorry that we're starting a couple of minutes late. The computers are just walking us through a little update process, which we enjoy. I would look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing none, that brings us to the consent items. There are 5 of them. I just look, colleagues, to see if there are any you'd like to pull. If you could use your mic, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'd like to talk about 2.5.
The 2017 operating budget, okay. Okay, I see Councillor Zafin moving the other items. Seconded by Mayor Brown. Let's have a motion up there and we'll open it up for discussion. Okay, any discussions on item 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, or 2.4? Okay, not seeing any just from the chair. I'd like to say on the capital budget monitoring report, really glad to see a modest surplus and a number of projects being closed out, coming in under budget and having those funds returned back to the places they came from so we can do other projects. And I think it's a really good sign that we're being so disciplined on the capital side, that we're seeing those capital projects coming in under budget in a lot of cases. It gives us flexibility to handle those few cases where we do need additional funding, and I think it's really a very good sign. On number 2.2, the amendment to the honors list, I just wanted to say thank you to the advisory committee on accessibility who followed up with us when we hadn't made this change. I'm glad to see it coming forward so quickly so we can actually get that enacted and change it as they asked us to do 2 years ago. And on the compliance committee report, I know that this is one of my favorite reports of the year. I know that our staff put a lot of work into producing it, and I'm glad to see that it's come forward, and I think it's helpful for everyone to see the suppliers and people who are getting contracts and payments over $100,000 in particular. Any other questions, colleagues? Okay, seeing none, let's vote.
Chair, my vote's not coming up, but I'll vote manually yay.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to item 2.5, which was pulled by Councillor Morgan, the report on the 2017 operating budget. Councillor Morgan.
Great. I have a number of questions on this item, some of which I've spoken to the treasurer with beforehand, so I think there'll be answers to pretty much all of them. First off, I wanted to thank our staff for the report. I think this is a very important and detailed report. I think it allows us to have a high level of accountability over the decisions we've made in the past, how they're tracking on the budget, what's ahead, what's not, what the risks are. And I also appreciate the mid-year monitoring report and the comparisons to it to see where we thought we'd be and where we ended up. And as the report shows, the projected $4.2 million surplus became a $6.9 million surplus. And then there's a range of recommendations on how to deal with that. And I'm generally supportive of all of them, although I have a couple of questions about the report. The first is the what looks to be a relatively significant contribution this year to the Efficiency, Effectiveness, and Economy Reserve Fund of about 2.9 tax supported. What is the value of that fund? And at some point, if not today, I wouldn't mind knowing the expected draws on that, just to know how that fund is tracking in the future.
Through the chair, the balance in the unfunded, in the EEE Reserve Fund is $5.6 million, and that's after the contribution of the 2.9 for 2017.
And do we have any list of potential draws that we're expecting on that? And if not today, I wouldn't mind seeing that at a future meeting.
Sorry, I forgot that one through the chair. So we do have a list of expected draws through that, primarily obviously on the budgeted balance that we had previous to this contribution, but we can certainly report back on that in the future to show what that will be.
Sure, that would be great. And again, I don't need that today, but that is something that I'd like to see the plans for that fund, particularly when there are large inflows. And I also know it's a fund that does have a regular inflow through previous decisions we've made to do with the LED lighting upgrades. The $5 million allocated to support the changes we made to the subsidized transit programs. I just want to understand exactly how that's going to work. The way that I read it in the report is we know that that was something that we were piloting and that it wasn't funded any sort of way. We provided some council direction to use surplus to do so. I think the surplus was going to come from future years, but if I read this right, we have a surplus this year, so what we're doing is being responsible, putting aside the money while we have it to fund the pilots in advance. In other words, there won't be any future draws needed to support those pilot projects unless they go above the estimated amount that we've done. So the 5 million is really an estimate and kind of an upper limit to what we're setting aside. But if we don't actually expend all of that in the pilots, it would return to surplus in the future.
So through the chair, that's absolutely correct. So the council resolution reads that the funding source would come from surplus and or the contingency if required. So given that we do not know whether or not we will have a surplus for the current year, and also because we have some knowledge to date of what the take up is up to this point, and we've made some projections based on the use to this point. So we're still using 20% take up for the subsidized transit pass at this point. So based on our calculations, we're estimating, we think approximately $5 million is the cost of all of those programs in place based on also the actuals that we've seen for the children's pass, or free children, I should say. So based on that and being able to give us some certainty, because of course, we haven't hit our mid-year. It's too soon to know whether we will have, or what our results will be for 2018. We are looking at this as an opportunity to ensure that we have a funding source based on the full intent of the pilot program. So these calculations, the $5 million estimate is based on the uptake that we're estimating at this point in time over the full 2-year term of the pilot. So I believe it's 18 months, but we're looking at the full amount to allow those to run through, to be able to allow council the time to look at what the results are before they make any further decisions. So we're using the surplus to ensure we have a funding source. And what it will also do is take some pressure off our contingency and give us a little bit of certainty that we know that those will be there should we need to use that for an unforeseen event.
Thank you. I'll comment on that piece later, but in general, I'm supportive of that approach. I think it's something that was directed by council. This is a responsible way for us to essentially set the money aside while we have the capacity and take some pressure off of the contingency reserve. If you flip ahead into more of the details of the report under some of the cost drivers, one of them is for Parks and Recreation, significant costs associated with essentially flooding that happened. And it says some expected to be recoverable through insurance proceeds. Is that why it's a risk and not something that, given we had a surplus, we didn't just fund? Because it's only expected to be about $200,000.
Through the chair, those are based on the costs that we've identified to date. So essentially, we had originally, when we were starting to see the costs come in, identified there was a possible concern for significant costs. Through our insurance and other mitigation means, the full cost as we know it to date is approximately $200,000. So because it's small in comparison to other events, we are recommending that it's likely going to go through our 2018 surplus deficit, and should there be significant costs, we do have a severe weather fund reserve that is there that does have a balance in it that we could draw from if required.
Okay, through the chair, I'm very supportive of that as well. I just wanted to know if we didn't have that fund, it may have been a responsible thing to do just to fund it while we had the money, because it's a one-time cost. A positive in the report is the emerging issues, which you would have seen in previous reports, that have been essentially mitigated or resolved through this report. That's kind of on the next page from where I was. This talks about things like, you know, the cost of a rank ballot in the election and a whole range of other things that essentially it looks like we found ways to mitigate all of those concerns through either existing draws on reserve funds or changes to the way that we've allocated those items. So I think that's a very strong positive. They were issues that were identified in the mid-year monitoring report as concerns. They seem to all be resolved. I think that's a very good list, those 1 through 8 on that particular page. So thanks to our staff for reporting out on those, because I do like to track those things across multiple reports. Going further on to where the surpluses and deficits in the report were drawn from. So this is Appendix B that I'm now referring to. The financial management section, first off, there's always two that I look at. I like to look at how much council itself actually saved by not spending all of our expense accounts. And we always seem to make a big contribution. So kudos to us on doing that. But in the financial management section, there's some draws in that. There's a lot of large numbers in that section, right? And so they kind of offset each other. And in my understanding of these, I certainly think I get both of them. I know that I always get the operating budget contingency reserve drawdown kind of backwards when I think about it, because it's a deficit, but this is one, it's actually a positive the way it's listed here, because it's not taking a draw on the contingency reserve, even though it's called deficit. So that's fine. The $1.3 million deficit due to higher than anticipated assessment appeals, partially offset by increased supplementary tax uptake. So we expect what property is going to be, people go in and appeal their MPAC assessments, and the potential amount of taxes coming into the municipality changes. That causes a deficit in these lines. It's 1.3 million. That seems pretty high. I don't recall it being as high in previous years. Is there any concerns with that? And if there are, in the future, would we contemplate setting up some sort of reserve fund to mitigate those changes over time? So the years where, you know, we can contribute to it and then have some level to balance off in years where there might be an abnormally high amount of MPAC appeals.
Mr. Logan.
Most of the appeals that are represented in those dollar amounts are commercial and industrial properties. And what has happened in the past, sometimes it takes a great deal of time for these appeals to go through the Assessment Review Board. So we occasionally get hit with multiple years and large amounts, and some years it fluctuates quite a bit. What we normally do at year ends is we do an assessment of what's outstanding and an estimate of what the potential liability is. And that's an exercise we go through with every financial statement preparation. And we set up an allowance account, and I would say it's a process we need to go through every year. And I think the most appropriate description of it is an allowance rather than a reserve. And it's interesting, if you read Section 289 of the Municipal Act, it actually is the responsibility of the treasurer to review that very carefully and set it up each year.
I always learn something when Mr. Logan answers a question, so I appreciate that. Now I have a section of the Act to review. Thank you for the homework. So that's the questions I have. Again, I want to compliment our staff on the report, and I do want to emphasize my support for the staff recommendations. I know last year I was particularly active in voting against some changes we made that were different from our surplus policy. A last minute motion that came to council, which I still am committed to, not being too happy about. But in this case, the $5 million I think is very responsible, because it is a decision that council directed. It was going to be a draw in the future. We have the ability to fund it now, and I think our treasurer has outlined a very responsible approach that creates some relief on the operating budget contingency reserve and lets us put aside the money to fund the pilot projects now, knowing that we'll have to deal with the continuation of them at the conclusion of that pilot should they continue in the budgeting process. But I think this is a very responsible way to make sure that that's taken care of now, rather than having to worry about future surpluses and whether or not they may or may not exist in future years. So I'm very supportive of the recommendations, and I'd be happy to move them at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Colleagues, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I'm happy with recommendations A to D, so I won't need to comment on those. I want to talk about the water and the wastewater. Our water boards are putting a great deal of money into reserve funds, and for that reason, I think they're overcharging a bit. And at one of our meetings, when we were discussing having the 3% increase, I wanted to have that be less, although my colleagues didn't support that. One of the problems I see, though, is that that figure is high, and then the amount that we pay with our little margin seems to be high as well. So we've got large revenues in both of these, and I would like them to be lesser in the future. But my concern is that, again, we're taking a bunch of money from residents paying for water and socking it into reserve funds. And I'm just wondering if there are other pressures that we may have ahead of us that might better use that money. And so through the chair to our treasurer, I just wanted to ask, we've got 1 year left in the multi-year budget with commitment to 2.8% tax increase. How on target are we for that? Because I'm wondering if that's going to be a big problem, perhaps some of these funds could go in that direction. So there's my question.
So are you looking for alternatives for the rate-supported spending within water or within wastewater, or outside of water and wastewater?
I would say outside. Is that so? Where we take this, we could put this anywhere, and I think maybe we should take it to some other places, but maybe first we could just address the budget, how we're looking at that.
So through the chair, just to reconfirm what I've heard is there's three different budgets that we're looking at. Obviously, the property tax supported budget, our rate supported budgets being water and wastewater are treated separately because they are based on water consumption and the demands of those systems specifically. We don't typically cross, although I'm obviously up to council. There are different ways you could suggest to do that. Because it is specific, so any surplus within the property tax budget and across either one, I guess I would say at this point, is that when we have a surplus, that is a one-time occurrence. It would not be something that we could use to support our property tax decreases or rate decreases because they are, of course, one time. So all that does is buy you a little bit of a reduction, but then you have to make up the difference the following year. So from that perspective, the reserve fund approach for a one-time surplus is a better option because it allows you to use that appropriately for one-time sources.
All right, well, thank you. So perhaps then you would tell me where we are in terms of our promise to stay under 2.8%.
So through the chair, so as you recall from a budget discussion, the last was passed at 3.2% with a direction that civic administration come back with potential options to decrease that back to our approved amount in the original multi-year budget. So we are actively at work and we'll be bringing forward options with the introduction of the 2019 budget update to show how we are able to provide options to get back to that number.
Okay. Thank you. This might be a too creative option for most people. What I would like to ask, though, is what we can do to cut these potential surpluses down. Like I said, I think Londoners may be getting overcharged for water, and from the city and from our water boards, and I would like to remedy that if possible.
Having participated in some discussions about the water rates with you in the past, to Councillor Van Holst, what I would suggest is this is a report on the end of year results and probably a discussion for the budget, both at the water boards, which we've had before, and also here at council when we're talking about the budget for 2019 and the updates. I'm not sure today that we're going to resolve the issue that you're talking about. I know that you want to see some movement on that front. I've got my own questions, frankly, about the water surplus, which is quite substantial. So I don't know if you want to pursue it further now or during the next budget update.
Thank you. I'm actually just looking here for some options. If there's something that's here that we can use to take that down, but for the most part, I'm hoping to highlight the issue here. You said you've got some questions about it. I'd be more interested in hearing your comments, Mr. Chair, than to continue with suggesting a plan.
Any other questions or no? So from the chair, I was wondering about the volume. That's quite a substantial increase in volume, expected volume. So it looks like it's about 3.5% on the water side. The explanation is, it's a busy growth year and there's a lot of people doing things, so they used a lot of water. And is that a trend that we expect to continue? I know it's just kind of a brief explanation in a financial report and not a report from water about what's going on with water, but it is, I think, over 1 million cubic liters of water over. So I just wonder if we could get a sense of how much water is being used and whether we think that's going to be continuing pressure on the positive side.
So through the chair, my apologies, I don't have the water information with me to be able to give you a trend analysis. I don't know if Ms. Scheer may have something else to add, but certainly based on our actuals, that was something that we saw a big change in terms of being a contributing factor. That's something we'll have to look at in terms of trends and rates as we bring that back. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Scheer if she's got anything else more definitive.
Thank you through the chair. I don't have all of the detailed water forecasts with me. However, we have seen a change in trend with related to construction use, as well as potentially some new industrial use that we're projecting to come online in the next little while. This is at the same time we've seen a bit of a plateau in the reduction we've seen in domestic use. People seem to have gotten to a sort of a base level they tend to use in their own homes. So we are monitoring that relative to plans related to regular growth within the city, as well as potentially some significant industrial growth. It's a year-by-year process, but we do try to roll that out over, you know, a 3-year or so, 4 or 5-year average. We'll continue to monitor that and report back as we see that development pattern continue to emerge in London.
Okay. Any other discussion, colleagues? If not, perhaps we have a mover and a seconder. Okay, seconder. Mayor Brown, thank you. Just while we have that open from the chair, I just want to say I think this is every year that I've been on council, we've had a surplus. It's a pretty good record, frankly. And I think on the operating budget side, I know it's a pretty thin margin. $6.9 million sounds like a lot, but it's on a very big number. And really, we're keeping it very close to the budgeted amounts. Really glad to see that kind of discipline from our staff, not just in finance, but across the organization. Just make sure everyone votes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item 4.1, year 2018 tax policy. Colleagues will recall we discussed this at our last meeting and referred it to this meeting. Colleagues will also recall Councillor Morgan and I had a variety of opinions on this topic, so I think I'll just pass the chair right off the top to Councillor Zafman.
Looking for any speakers, Councillor Morgan.
Okay, first off, I appreciate the work our staff has done. I think it's excellent, and I had a chance to meet with Mr. Logan, and I appreciated his insight and guidance on some of the questions that I had leading up to this meeting. And so what I want to focus on is the direction that I'm supportive of and the reasons why. First off, I want to remind colleagues why I wanted this referred back and why I wasn't supportive of the two options we had before us. As outlined at the last meeting, because of changes in assessment, our projected tax increase in the budget doesn't quite land in the way that it is projected. It lands slightly different because properties are appreciating at different rates. Particularly the commercial property is appreciating a much faster rate in the city than other properties. And so making no changes whatsoever would have led to, and having no education tax benefit would have led to a commercial tax increase of about 5.97%. To the residential benefit, that would have gone down to 1.55. Multi-residential about 4.44. That's before any application of benefits from the education tax. That's just how the tax rate would have fell if we did nothing and property changes appreciated. And those are average numbers. Obviously, there are people above and below those. The options presented to us that made some adjustments of those ranged from what would have been, and I'm doing these ones after the education tax is in, kind of the result people are seeing at the end of the day, would have seen either residential at 2.0 or 1.1 and commercial at 2.9 or 5.3. Neither of those were acceptable. The one side I thought the commercial was too high, and on the other side I thought we were giving away too much of the benefit that the residential class was getting from the appreciation. They would actually be going up from the 1.55 expected up to 2. So I was looking for something that accomplished both of those things, bringing down the commercial rate a little bit more and allowing the residential and multi-residential classes to do so. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that our year-over-year approach and policy and my own approach and policy was consistent. So I want to talk about the commercial ratio and the way that we've been changing that over time, not just this council, but the previous council. The commercial ratio from the previous council was relatively steady at about 1.98 for, I think, 6 or 7 years. We ended up lowering that slightly to 1.95. We did a couple of things that year. We harmonized the industrial rate, which was, I think, 2.22 the year before, down to 1.95. And we aligned the multi-residential rate with that as well. Due to the work of Councillor Helmer, we also, there was a good case outlined for lowering the multi-residential rate ratio at a faster pace, because that was a class that was paying a lot more because of the depreciation that was happening. Now we have had the commercial ratios at about 1.95 for a couple of years. And so I do think it is in our own strategic interests and to the benefit of the employers in the city for us to continue to lower that ratio over time. And I think we should do it, slowly and responsibly, so that we can measure the impacts of each year. And so I am supportive of the recommendation that lowers it another couple of points from where it was before, and that's the one that brings it down to a ratio of 1.93. And I anticipate we'll have an opportunity to lower it in the next year to 1.91 perhaps, but we'll have to assess that at the time. Option AB2 essentially accomplishes everything that I wanted to accomplish. It ensures that the residential rate is receiving a benefit from the both the education tax changes as well as the changes in property assessment at 1.3. It also brings down that commercial rate, which would have been a 5.97% hit, down to under 5, which is still high, but that's pressured mainly by appreciation. And I think we will help that over time by continuing to lower the commercial ratio in a responsible way, downward over time to a manageable level. But I think we should do that as a policy discussion. And I'm not sure where that falls in, and maybe that's another discussion we have to have about where tax ratios should be going over time. I know that this is our tax ratio policy for a given time, but I do have an interest in continuing that trend and having that as options on the table for us to consider in the future. I think it's responsible with the multi-residential as well. The option continues our strategy of lowering that rate at a slightly faster pace to recognize that people in their homes are facing what were larger than average tax increases, which to a certain degree are passed on to the residents. There are some restrictions on that. And so I think the AB2 option is a nice balance between the other two options that accomplishes many of the things that I think I wanted to accomplish, and that's a residential rate that will be down to 1.3, a commercial rate that comes down from what they were facing an unreasonable level. It lowers the commercial ratios. It continues our approach on multi-residential. And I think it's a responsible step in the direction to rationalizing our tax policy over time. And so that would be the option I'm supportive of and the reasons for it. And I appreciated committees allowing us to have this deferred so that we could have a few more options. I know this is probably our last chance to approve it because before making everybody very nervous about not having the tax rates approved in time. So I look forward to the discussion and comments of my colleagues, but that's where I stand on this now. I'd be willing to move AB2 for those reasons, but I'm open to hearing what other colleagues think.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. I'll go to Councillor Helmer and then Councillor Van Holst.
Sure, I will, first I'll second the idea of doing AB2. I think that's a good option, striking a good balance. Just to add on to a couple of things that Councillor Morgan has said, I think bringing the multi-unit residential ratio down a little bit again is a good move in the right direction. As colleagues know, I particularly focused on that issue, and I would like, frankly, to be going faster on that one, but I think we have to balance a lot of different interests in tax policy, and I think this is a positive step forward. I also wanted to point out that the change in the farm tax ratio is also very positive, and perhaps I will leave it to colleagues who represent areas that have a lot of farmland to talk about that a bit more, but it's down to 0.11, which not only is lower than it has been in the past here in the City of London, but it's significantly lower than it is in the County of Middlesex, for example.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I was looking at AB1 and AB2 as the ways to go, so I'm pleased with Councillor Morgan's suggestion. I'll just point out that on the page 103, the next report talks about how the the tax ratios have a really strong, in this table, high effect on the broad focus on all industry types in London, long-term business time frame, business planning, significance in business planning and workforce expansion, effect on ongoing competitiveness, impact on industry retention, promotion of diversification and economic development, and potential for reduction in existing business vacancies in buildings. So all of those things say that our property tax ratio has a very strong effect on those. So for us to reduce those in the commercial realm, I think is going to be very positive for London. And Councillor Morgan suggested that this was a trend. And so for us to be able to show that that trend is continuing, I think it's going to bring some, will create some confidence in London for new investors.
Thank you, Councilor Van Holst. I think we have a mover and a seconder that's ready. I can give it back to the chair, and then I can make a comment if that's okay.
Thank you. I have Councillor Zafman next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you first, I think Councillor Morgan said this well, but thanks to Mr. Logan for some of these additional options. It's really nice to be able to have some different ways to be able to consider this, and I think we're landing at a good spot here. And Councillor Helmer started this well, but it's really amazing that we're trying to keep farm rates low as well. You know, we're a big urban center, but at the same time, we still have farmland in the city, and I hear quite often from residents who own farmland and maintain farmland in the city that things can be quite tough with higher rates. So keeping them lower is quite beneficial, and obviously we have a little bit of different scope on farmland than our partners in the county, but I know that Deputy Mayor Myers in Thames Centre had tried to do a similar thing and trying to get some of their rates lowered, and unfortunately was unsuccessful. And so it's glad to see that we're being able to assist in some way there as well.
Okay. Councillor Morgan.
I just wanted to add one final comment. Something I didn't mention was in looking at this and the rates that people actually face, up until this year, I looked at, you know, what we were looking at on a 5-year average. And that 5-year average that people were facing, excluding whatever the changes are this year, I'll have to add that into the average, was on the residential, it was about 1.93. On the multi-residential, it's about 3.6. Commercial, 1.3. And industrial, negative 3.3. So you can see that the option that we select will continue to kind of consolidate those together. In other words, balance kind of the fairness of the increase that people are facing over time. It will bring residential down, it'll bring multi-residential down. Commercial will be slightly up and industrial will be slightly up, but those are by far the ones that are the lowest. In fact, in 2015, our commercial rate was 0.02 that was actually faced. And so I think looking at this over time and being fair, while continuing that signal to be committed to lowering the commercial ratio, so that, you know, that's a good positive tracking, like Councillor Van Holst said, and that our business community have confidence that we're continuing to want to mitigate the appreciation that they face through MPAC slowly and over time and in a consistent way. I think balances all of those considerations, and I just wanted to have colleagues have a sense on what the increases have been that different groups have faced over the past 5 years.
Okay, let's open up the vote.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to a variety of requests for designation as municipal significance. I believe we can deal with them all together. I wonder if there's a mover for that. Councillor Zafman, seconded by Mayor Brown. Any discussion on that? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the timing is great for this, especially the first one. Musician John Carlos Centeno is coming to play Colombian music. I've had so much Colombian coffee in this last year that I'm feeling a need for this kind of music. So I'm thrilled that he'll be coming. He plays all over the world. So why not come to London, our music city? So I'm happy to support all of these.
Okay, I think we'll just get that up on the screen and then we can vote. Oh, Councillor Zaveman, go ahead.
I'm happy to do this while we're voting. Just a quick comment, but it happens every year that we've been seeing both the Forest City Beer Fest as a municipally significant event, but also the Appleseed Cider Festival, something new, which is great to see. And I just wanted to quickly say thank you to Aaron Brown for continuously doing great work putting these events on in our city, because it's a great addition to all the other events we already have going on here.
Okay, and the vote is open.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to additional business deferred matters, to see if there's anything. Councillor Renholst.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a heads up to our staff that I'll be looking in our budget discussions for ways to ease the pressure off the water bills. So what people are paying for utilities. And of course, when our our water and wastewater bills are connected. So if we're paying a little more than we need to for water, then we're also paying a little more than we need to for wastewater. And that's how it seems when you see both of those are in surplus. So I would say and thank our staff responsible with those things. They do have them fairly well lined up. So that seems like the machine is tuned. It's just we're putting a little more gas into it than we need to.
Okay, any other additional business? We have a confidential item. I wonder if someone would like to move that we go into closed session for the reasons listed on the agenda pertaining to land acquisition, instructions and directions to officers and employees of the corporation relating to a proposed disposition of land, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, it's moved by Councillor Zaveman, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. The vote is open.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we'll be in committee room 3. I expect since we went through additional business here that we'll adjourn from committee room 3 after going back into public session. We'll open the door, make sure that folks in the media know that we're back in public session.